20 Hells Angels watched a millionaire YouTuber slap his maid on a live stream, and what they did next wasn't what anyone expected. No police, no lawyers, just 20 engines starting at once, and a walk across the street that would change everything. Before we dive in, where are you watching from right now? Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this brotherhood reaches. And if you believe in stories about real men, real honor, and real justice, hit that subscribe button, because this channel is built on loyalty, and we don't forget the people who ride with us. Now, let's get in. The morning sun hit Riverside Heights like a spotlight on a stage nobody asked to see. Everything gleamed. The streets were wide and empty. The lawns were green in that expensive, unnatural way like they'd been painted on. And at the end of Maple Crest Drive, rising up like a monument to things that didn't matter, stood the mansion. Marble steps, floor-to-ceiling windows, a driveway so polished you could see your reflection in the stone. It looked perfect, until you looked closer. Gadzi stood in front of that mansion with his phone held high, his voice echoing off the quiet houses around him. "Another day, another million, baby," he shouted, spinning so the camera caught the full view, the cars, the gate, the diamond-studded watch flashing on his wrist. "This is what freedom looks like. This is what happens when you stop making excuses and start making moves." He laughed loud, sharp, the kind of laugh that didn't reach his eyes. Behind him, a woman in a simple grey dress knelt on the marble steps, scrubbing in silence. She didn't look up. She never did. Her name was Maria, and she had learned a long time ago that some people don't see you unless you're in their way. Across the street, in the shade of an old oak tree, 20 motorcycles sat in a row like soldiers at attention. Chrome gleamed, leather creaked, engines ticked softly as they cooled under the California sun. The men who rode them weren't shouting, they weren't flexing. They were simply there, solid, quiet, present in a way that didn't need to announce itself. Mr. Bobry sat on the curb, a rag in one hand, polishing the headlight on his '98 Softail. His back was straight, his movements were careful, deliberate. 30 years in the military had taught him that precision wasn't about perfection, it was about respect. For the bike, for the road, for the brothers beside you. Big Ken leaned against his diner, arms crossed, watching the mansion with the kind of stillness that comes from having seen too much to be surprised by anything anymore. Williams crouched near his Road King, tightening a bolt, his hands steady despite the weight of the years. And Bop, young, lean, still hungry to prove himself, stood with his helmet under one arm, eyes flicking between the bikes and the house across the street. None of them spoke. They didn't need to. This was the 6th year of the ride. Every spring, the Hells Angels chapter out of Riverside met at Bobry's place to prep for the Veterans Memorial Charity, run a 200-mile journey through the hills to raise money for shelters, food drives, and families left behind. It wasn't about the miles. It was about showing up. Bobry glanced up from his bike, and that's when he saw her. Maria. She was kneeling on the top step now, wringing out a rag, her shoulders bent under the weight of work that never seemed to end. Her greying hair was tied back in a bun. Her hands were red and raw. Bobry's jaw tightened. He knew her. Not well, but enough. She volunteered at the Haven shelter every Sunday, the same place his chapter donated to every winter. She served food to veterans who had nowhere else to go. She smiled at men who had forgotten what kindness looked like, and she never asked for anything in return. He also knew her story. Her husband had been a biker, a Marine, a brother who rode with the chapter back in the 90 seconds before a drunk driver took him off the road for good. Her son was deployed now somewhere in the desert, fighting a war most people had stopped talking about. She carried all of that quietly, the way strong people do. Big Ken noticed Bobry's gaze and followed it across the street. "That's the Maid," Ken said, voice low. "Works 2 jobs. Sends everything to a boy overseas. Bobri nodded slowly. Her husband rode with us, he said. Long time ago. Ken's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Then she's family. Bobri's voice was softer now, quieter, but it carried weight. Then she's ours. Across the street, Gadzi was still shouting into his phone, pacing back and forth, his sneakers squeaking on the marble. You want success? Stop waiting for permission. Stop listening to people who tell you to slow down. I didn't get here by playing it safe. I got here by being ruthless. Maria stood, gathering her bucket and rag. She moved carefully, trying not to disturb him. But as she turned toward the door, her foot caught the edge of the bucket. Coffee still warm from the morning pot splashed across the marble, and onto Gadzi's pristine white sneakers. He stopped mid-sentence. The phone stayed up. The smile vanished. Bobri's hand stilled on the rag. Williams stood up slowly. Bop's fingers tightened around his helmet. Big Ken's eyes narrowed. Across the street, 20 engines sat silent. But every man was watching now. Gadzi turned. Maria opened her mouth to apologize. And in that moment, before a single word was spoken, the air changed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't sudden. But anyone who'd ever spent time on a battlefield, or a road where the wrong choice could end you, knew exactly what it meant. Something was about to break. The coffee pooled around Gadzi's sneakers like spilled blood. For a moment, the world held its breath. Maria's hands trembled as she reached for the rag. I'm so sorry, Mr. Gadzi. I didn't. You useless woman. The words cracked through the air like a whip. 23,000 people were watching the live stream. Comments flooded the screen, laughing emojis, fire emojis, people eating popcorn, while a man's ego burned hotter than the California sun. Maria stepped back, her apology dying on her lips. And then it happened. Crack. The slap echoed across the driveway, sharp and final. Maria stumbled. Her hand went to her cheek, but she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stood there, silent, dignified, absorbing a blow she'd probably taken in 1,000 different ways throughout her life. Gadzi turned back to the camera, breathless, wild-eyed. See, this is what I'm talking about. You can't let people disrespect you. You gotta show them who's... He stopped, because across the street, something had changed. 20 helmets lifted in unison. It wasn't choreographed. It wasn't planned. It was instinct. The kind of instinct that gets carved into you when you've spent years watching each other's backs in places where hesitation means death. Mr. Bobri stood slowly, folding the rag and placing it on his seat with the kind of care that made the gesture feel like a ritual. Big Ken rolled his shoulders, cracking his neck to one side. William's hand drifted to the patch on his vest, the one that read, "Respect rides forever." Bop whispered 2 words that would be repeated in biker bars for years to come. Mount up. The engines didn't roar. They growled. Low, deep, primal. It was the sound of thunder rolling in from a distant horizon, inevitable, unstoppable, and absolutely certain. One by one, 20 Harleys came to life. The ground vibrated. The air thickened. Every dog in the neighborhood started barking, and every curtain on Maple Crest Drive twitched as people looked out to see what the hell was happening. Gadzi froze, phone still in his hand. The comments on his live stream exploded. Bro, who are those guys? Hell's Angels patch. Oh my God. You're done, bro. Rip this dude. Maria looked up, her hand still on her cheek. And for the first time that morning, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Mr. Bobri didn't rush. He pulled on his gloves slow, deliberate, like a surgeon prepping for an operation. He adjusted his vest. He touched the dog tags hanging around his neck, just once, the way a man touches a cross before walking into fire. Then he swung his leg over the bike, and the formation began. 20 motorcycles rolled forward in 2 columns, chrome flashing in the sun, boots scraping pavement in perfect rhythm. They crossed the street like a funeral procession. Slow, silent, final. Godsey's voice cracked. Hey, guys, it's cool, it was just... The bike stopped 10 feet away. Engines idling. 20 men dismounted and stood in a line, arms at their sides, faces hidden behind visors and beards, and the kind of calm that comes from knowing exactly who you are. Mr. Bobry stepped forward. He didn't shout. He didn't raise his fist. He simply removed his sunglasses, looked Godsey dead in the eye, and said, "Son, you just raised your hand against a woman who serves. In our world, a real man raises his hand only to help her up." The silence that followed felt heavier than any blow. Godsey laughed nervous, high-pitched, the laugh of a man realizing he'd crossed a line he didn't even know existed. "Dude, relax. It was just content. It's not that serious." Williams stepped forward and held up a phone. The screen showed Godsey's own live stream. 23,000 people watching. Hundreds of comments flooding in. "Coward. Disgusting. Someone please id this guy." Williams' voice was calm, cold. 23,000 people just watched you be a coward. Congratulations. You're famous. Godsey's face drained of color. Mr. Bobry glanced at Maria, still standing on the steps, silent and strong. Then he looked back at Godsey. "You want to be a man people look up to?" he said quietly. "You're gonna have to earn it." Godsey's hands were shaking. Not from fear, not yet, but from the sudden, crushing realization that the world he'd built on filters and flexing had just collided with something real. I don't understand," he stammered. "What do you want from me?" Mr. Bobry didn't answer right away. He turned to Maria, who was still standing on the steps, her cheek red, her eyes wet but unbowed. "Ma'am," he said, his voice softening in a way that made grown men in the club straighten their backs. "You all right?" Maria nodded, though her hands were still trembling. "I'm fine," she whispered. "Really? It's okay." "No, ma'am," Big Ken said, stepping forward. "It's not." Bobry looked back at Godsey. "You ever serve anyone in your life?" he asked. "Ever put someone else's needs before your own? Ever worked a job where nobody knew your name and nobody cared?" Godsey opened his mouth, then closed it. The camera was still rolling. The world was still watching. And for the first time in his life, he had no script. "Didn't think so," Bobry said. "So here's what's going to happen. You're coming with us." "Wait, what?" "You heard me," Bobry gestured to the bikes. "You want to learn what it means to be a man. You're going to start by serving the people you've spent your whole life looking down on." Godsey's voice pitched higher. "I can't just... I have a meeting, I have sponsors, Williams cut him off. "You got two choices, kid. You come with us, or we make sure every one of those 23,000 people knows exactly what kind of man you really are." Bob grinned. "And trust me, bro, we got receipts." 10 minutes later, Godsey was seated on the back of Big Ken's diner, his designer jeans already smudged with road dust, his phone confiscated, his entire sense of identity crumbling with every mile. The convoy rolled through Riverside Heights, engines rumbling like a storm that refused to break. People stopped on sidewalks. Kids pointed. A few veterans, old men with faded caps and worn jackets, snapped to attention and saluted as the Hells Angels passed. Bobry led the pack, his back straight, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. This wasn't about revenge. It never was. This was about correction. They pulled up to a low brick building on the edge of town. The sign above the door read, "The Haven Shelter." A hand up, not a handout. Godsey climbed off the bike, legs wobbling. "What is this place?" "This," Mr. Bobry said, removing his helmet, "is where Maria volunteers every Sunday. This is where men who fought for your freedom come when they got nowhere else to go. And this is where you're going to learn what service actually looks like." Inside, the shelter was warm not from heaters, but from the quiet dignity of the people who filled it. Veterans lined the walls, some in wheelchairs, some with canes. All of them wore the same, looked tired but unbroken, forgotten but not defeated. Maria was already there, tying on an apron, her cheeks still faintly red. She looked up when Gadzi walked in, and she smiled. Not a big smile, not a forgiving one, just steady. Mr. Bobry handed Gadzi an apron. "Put it on." "I don't." "Put it on." Gadzi's hands fumbled with the strings. Big Ken leaned in close, his voice a low rumble. "You spent your whole life taken. Today you give." For the next 3 hours, Gadzi served food. He ladled soup into bowls. He poured water into plastic cups. He wiped down tables and swept floors and apologized when he dropped a tray. And every single veteran who walked through that line looked him in the eye. Some nodded. Some said thank you. One old man, his face lined with scars, his voice rough as gravel, stopped and stared at Gadzi for a long moment. Then he said, "We fought for this flag so people like her could live without fear. You remember that before you ever raise your hand again." Gadzi's throat tightened. He nodded. He didn't trust himself to speak. By the time the lunch rush ended, Gadzi's arms ached. Not from the gym. Not from some carefully curated workout routine he'd filmed for content. From work. Real work. The kind that doesn't come with applause or ad revenue. He stood at the sink, hands submerged in soapy water, scrubbing plates while Maria worked beside him in silence. Her movements were efficient, practiced, calm, the rhythm of someone who'd done this 1,000 times and never once complained. Gadzi glanced at her. "How do you do this?" he asked quietly. Maria didn't look up. "Do what?" "This. All of it. The work. The disrespect." His voice cracked. "How do you just keep going?" Maria's hands paused for a moment. Then she set down the dish she was holding and finally looked at him. "Because it's not about me," she said simply. "It's about them." She nodded toward the dining room, where a few veterans still sat, talking quietly over coffee. These men gave everything. Some of them lost limbs, some lost families, some lost themselves. Her voice was soft, but it carried weight. "If I can give them one warm meal, one moment where they feel seen, that's enough." Gadzi swallowed hard. "I didn't see it that way." "I know," Maria said. "Most people don't." Outside, the bikers sat in a circle on the curb, sharing a 6-pack of root beer and bags of chips from the corner store. Big Ken's daughter, a little girl, no older than 8, with pigtails and a gap-toothed grin, sat on her father's knee, coloring in a notebook. "Daddy," she said, holding up a drawing. "Is that the lady you helped today?" It was a crayon sketch of Maria, standing in front of the shelter with a smile. Ken's throat tightened. "Yeah, baby, that's her. Is she okay now?" Ken looked over at the shelter, where Maria's silhouette moved behind the window. "She's gonna be just fine." The little girl smiled and went back to coloring. Williams leaned back against his bike, arms crossed. "Think the kid's learning anything?" he asked. Mr. Bobry took a slow sip of his root beer. "He's learning what his money can't buy." Bob grinned. "Respect?" "Humanity," Bobry corrected. "Respect comes after that." Inside, an older veteran, a man with silver hair and a purple heart pinned to his jacket, approached Gadzi at the sink. "You're that YouTube kid, aren't you?" Gadzi froze. Yeah, I am." The man studied him for a long moment. "I watched your videos once. Didn't care for 'em." He paused. "But I'll tell you something, son. Any man who's willing to stand at this sink after what you did today, that man's got a chance." Gadzi's eyes stung. "I don't deserve a chance." The veteran's expression softened. "None of us do, kid. That's why grace matters." He extended a hand. Gadzi stared at it, calloused, scarred, steady. Then he shook it. As the sun began to set, the bikers gathered near their rides. Big Ken's daughter ran up to Maria, clutching something in her hand. "Miss Maria." Maria knelt down, smiling. "What is it, sweetheart?" The little girl held out a single red rose, slightly crumpled from being carried in her tiny fist. "My daddy says you're brave." Maria's eyes filled with tears. She took the rose and pulled the little girl into a hug. "Thank you," she whispered. "You tell your daddy he's brave, too." Mr. Bobry watched from a distance, his jaw tight. Big Ken stood beside him. "You think we made a difference today?" Ken asked. Bobry nodded slowly. "We reminded him what the world looks like when you stop staring at yourself." He looked at his brothers, men who'd fought wars, buried friends, loved fiercely, and lived harder. "We've fought battles overseas," he said quietly. "But the real war, it's keeping decency alive right here." Every man in the circle raised a fist over his heart. The patch on their backs gleamed in the fading light. Respect rides forever. Inside the shelter, Gadzi dried the last dish. Maria handed him a towel. "You did good today," she said. Gadzi looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, he saw a person, not a servant. "I'm sorry," he said, "for everything." Maria nodded. "I believe you." Gadzi didn't go home that night. He sat on the curb outside, the Haven shelter, knees pulled to his chest, staring at the cracked pavement like it held answers he'd spent his whole life avoiding. His phone was still in Big Ken's saddlebag. His followers were probably spiraling. His sponsors were probably panicking. His mansion was probably exactly where he left it, empty, cold, and utterly meaningless. For the first time in years, Gadzi felt small. Not in a bad way. In a way that reminded him he was human. Mr. Bobry sat down beside him without a word. For a while, neither of them spoke. The night was cool. The stars were out. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked, and a screen door slammed shut. Finally, Bobry broke the silence. "You know why we ride?" Gadzi shook his head. "Most people think it's about freedom," Bobry continued. "The open road, no rules, all that. And yeah, that's part of it. But the real reason?" He paused. "It's because out there, on that bike, you can't lie. Not to the road, not to yourself. You're just there, present, honest." Gadzi's voice was hoarse. "I don't know how to be honest anymore. I've been lying so long I forgot what the truth even looks like." Bobry nodded. "Then you start small, one truth at a time." The next morning, Gadzi asked to borrow a phone. Big Ken handed him an old flip phone with a raised eyebrow. "No Instagram on this, kid." "I know." Gadzi stepped away from the group and made a call. When he came back, his eyes were red. "I called my mom," he said quietly. "Told her what I did. Told her I was sorry for everything." Williams clapped him on the shoulder. "That's a start." Over the next few days, Gadzi kept showing up at the shelter. Not because the bikers made him, because he wanted to. He learned the names of the regulars. He sat with the veterans and listened to their stories about Fallujah and Kaysan and the long, quiet battles fought in living rooms after the wars ended. One man told him about losing his legs in an IED blast. Another told him about coming home to a family that didn't recognize him anymore. A third told him about the brother he'd lost, and how every day since felt like walking through fog. Gadzi listened. He didn't film, he didn't post, he didn't perform. He just listened. Maria watched him from across the room, serving soup with the same quiet grace she always had. One afternoon, she sat down beside him during a break. "You're different now," she said. Gadzi managed a small smile. "I'm trying. I can tell." She paused. "My husband used to say something. He was a biker, you know. Rode with Mr. Bobry's chapter before he passed." Gadzi looked at her, surprised. "I didn't know." Maria's eyes softened. "He used to say, when a biker becomes your friend, they're your friend forever. That's the code, loyalty, brotherhood. It's not about the bike. It's about the man riding it." She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You're learning to be that man." That night, the bikers gathered around a fire outside the shelter. Someone brought a guitar. Someone else brought beer. Big Ken's daughter ran around with the other kids, laughing, chasing fireflies in the dark. Gadzi sat with them, nursing a Coke, feeling the warmth of the fire and the quiet hum of belonging. Bop nudged him. "You gonna ride with us someday?" Gadzi laughed, soft, genuine. "I don't even know how to ride a bike." "We'll teach you," Williams said. "But first, you gotta earn your patch." "How do I do that?" Mr. Bobry looked him dead in the eye. "You keep showing up. You keep serving. You keep being the man we saw today, not the one we saw on that screen." Gadzi nodded it. "I will." And for the first time in his life, he meant it. 3 weeks after the slap, Gadzi did something no one expected. He posted a video. No mansion in the background, no flashy cars, no diamond watch. Just him, sitting on the steps of the Haven shelter, looking tired and raw and real. The title was simple, "The Day I Learned What Respect Means." The video started with silence. Gadzi stared at the camera for a long moment, then took a breath. "I don't know how to start this," he said, "so I'm just going to say it. 3 weeks ago, I hit someone, a woman, on camera, in front of thousands of people." He paused, his voice cracking. "Her name is Maria. She works harder than I ever have. She's kinder than I'll ever be. And I disrespected her in the worst way possible." The comments section exploded. "Is this real? Bro, what happened to you? This can't be the same guy." Gadzi continued. "I'm not here to make excuses. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. I'm here to tell the truth." He looked directly into the lens. "Everything I sold you, the cars, the courses, the hustle harder mentality, it was a lie. I didn't get rich by working hard. I got rich by scamming people who trusted me." He pulled out a folder and held it up. "These are refund receipts. Every person who bought my course is getting their money back. All of it." The video went silent for a beat. Then the comments erupted. "What? No way. This dude really changed." "But that's not the real story," Gadzi said. "The real story is about the men who taught me what it means to be a man." The camera cut to footage shaky, unpolished of the bikers outside the shelter. Mr. Bobry, arms crossed, talking to a veteran. Big Ken's daughter handing Maria a rose. Williams serving food with the same quiet dignity he brought to everything. Bop laughing with a group of kids. "These men are Hell's Angels," Gadzi said, "and before you make assumptions, let me tell you what that means. It means they show up. It means they serve. It means when someone needs help, they don't post about it. They do something." The video ended with Gadzi standing beside Maria. She didn't say anything. She just smiled, small, steady, forgiving. "I don't deserve her forgiveness," Gadzi said, "but she gave it anyway, because that's who she is." He looked back at the camera. "If you want to learn about success, don't buy my old courses. Don't follow people like me. Follow people like her. Follow people like them." The screen faded to black. And then one final message appeared. "Respect costs nothing, but it can change everything." Within 24 hours, the video hit 10 million views. News outlets picked it up. Reddit threads dissected it. TikTok duets flooded the platform. But the comments that mattered most came from the biker community. "That's what we do. Respect. Brotherhood ain't just a word. When a biker becomes your friend, they're your friend forever." Mr. Bobry watched the video on his phone while sitting in his garage. Big Ken leaned over his shoulder. "Think it'll stick?" Ken asked. Bobry nodded slowly. "Time'll tell, but he took the first step. That's more than most." 2 months after the video dropped, the Haven shelter received a check in the mail. No return address, no name, just a number that made the shelter director sit down hard in her chair. "Arshu 1 million. Attached was a handwritten note on plain white paper. For Maria's son, for the veterans, for the people who serve without asking for anything in return. A friend. Maria was restocking shelves when the director found her. "Maria, you need to sit down." What's wrong? Maria's hands stilled, her mind immediately jumping to her son overseas. Nothing's wrong. Something's very right. The director handed her the note. Maria read it once, twice. Her hands started to shake. I don't understand. Someone donated enough money to fund this shelter for a full year, the director said, her voice trembling. And they set up a scholarship in your son's name. Maria's knees buckled. She sat down hard, tears streaming down her face. Who would do this? Across town, in a small apartment he'd moved into after selling the mansion, Gadzi closed his laptop. The transfer had gone through. He didn't need the director to know it was him. He didn't need the credit. He just needed to know that Maria's son, when he came home, would have a future waiting for him. A future built on respect, not cash, on service, not status. At the same time, Mr. Bobry's chapter held a meeting at their clubhouse. Big Ken stood up, holding a piece of paper. Brothers, we got something to discuss. He read aloud from the same note Maria had received. We know who sent this, Williams asked. Bobry shook his head. Does it matter? Bob grinned. Could be the kid. Could be, Bobry said. Or it could be someone else who learned what we've been teaching our whole lives. He looked around the room at his brothers, men with scars and stories, men who'd lost as much as they'd gained, men who knew that the only thing that mattered in the end was what you left behind. We didn't do this for recognition, Bobry said. We did it because it was right, and if that kid learned that lesson, then we did our job. Every man in the room nodded. A week later, Maria stood in front of the shelter with the director, unveiling a new sign above the kitchen. Respect costs nothing, but it can change everything. Beneath it, a small bronze plaque, in honor of all who serve. That evening, Gadzi walked past the shelter on his way home from his new job working construction. Hands raw, back aching, but heart lighter than it had been in years. He saw the sign. He saw Maria through the window, laughing with the veterans. And he kept walking. He didn't need to go in. He didn't need to be seen. He just needed to know that the work continued. At sunset, 20 motorcycles rolled out of Riverside Heights. The charity ride was complete. The mission was done. But as they rode into the California hills, engines rumbling like distant thunder, every man knew the same truth. This was never about one kid. It was about showing the world what brotherhood looks like when it rides with purpose. 6 months later, Gadzi stood at the edge of a desert highway, hands in his pockets, watching the sun rise over the mountains. He wasn't the same man anymore. The mansion was gone, sold to pay back everyone he'd scammed, with the leftover funds donated to veteran organizations across the country. The cars were gone. The watch was gone. The fake life was gone. What remained was something simpler, harder, real. He worked construction now, framed houses, poured concrete, came home sore and covered in dust. And every Sunday, without fail, he showed up at the Haven shelter, not for content, not for redemption, because it was where he belonged. Maria saw him that morning, stacking chairs after breakfast. You don't have to keep coming, you know, she said gently. Gadzi looked up, surprised. Why wouldn't I? Maria smiled. Because you've already proven yourself. Gadzi shook his head. That's not why I come. He paused. I come because this is the only place I've ever felt like I mattered for the right reasons. Maria's eyes softened. Then you'll always have a place here. Meanwhile, 1,000 miles away, a young man stepped off a military transport plane. His uniform was dusty. His face was tired, but his eyes were alive. His name was Miguel, Maria's son. He'd been deployed for 18 months, seen things no one should have to see, carried weight no one should have to carry, but he was home, and waiting for him at the airport, holding a sign that read, Welcome home. Marine was a woman he hadn't seen in over a year. His mother. When Maria saw him, she dropped the sign and ran. Miguel caught her, lifting her off the ground, and for a long moment the world stopped. "I'm home, Mama," he whispered. "I know, Maijo, I know." That evening, the Haven shelter held a homecoming dinner. The entire community showed up, veterans, volunteers, families, and 20 bikers, engines, parked outside like sentinels. Mr. Bobry stood at the head of the table and raised a glass. "To Miguel, to all the men and women who serve, and to the families who wait for them to come home." "Hear, hear," the room echoed. Miguel, still in uniform, stood and looked around at the faces, strangers who'd become family in his absence. "I don't know most of you," he said, "but my mum told me what you did, how you stood up for her, how you showed her respect when someone else didn't." His voice cracked. "You didn't have to do that, but you did, and that's why I fought, so people like you could keep being who you are." The room was silent. Then, one by one, every biker in the room stood, not at attention, not saluting, just standing, present. "There," Miguel nodded, tears in his eyes. "Thank you." After dinner, Mr. Bobry walked outside with Miguel. They stood by the bikes, the cool night air settling around them. "Your mum's a hell of a woman," Bobry said. Miguel smiled. "She raised me to be like her." "Then you're going to do just fine." Bobry extended a hand. Miguel shook it firm, respectful, the handshake of a man who understood what it meant. "If you ever need anything," Bobry said, "you call. When a biker becomes your friend, they're your friend forever." Miguel nodded. "I'll remember that." Inside, Gadzi sat with Maria, helping her pack up leftovers. "Your son seems like a good man," he said quietly. "He is," Maria said. "He learned from the best." Gadzi glanced out the window at the bikers. So did I. As the night deepened, the bikers prepared to ride. Big Ken's daughter ran up to Mr. Bobry, tugging on his vest. "Grandpa Bob, are we going on another adventure?" Bobry knelt down, smiling. "Every ride's an adventure, kiddo. Even if we're just going home, especially then." The engines started low, steady, a sound that had become a promise. One by one, the bikes rolled out, headlights cutting through the dark. Maria and Miguel stood in the doorway, watching them go. "Who are they, Mama?" Miguel asked. Maria smiled. "They're the reason I still believe in good men." A year later, everything had changed, and nothing had. The Haven shelter was thriving. Maria had been promoted to assistant director. Miguel was enrolled in college, studying social work, determined to give back the way others had given to him. Gadzi had saved enough to buy his first bike, a beaten-up Sportster he rebuilt with his own hands. It wasn't pretty, but it was his, and every Sunday he rode it to the shelter. Not as a guest, as a brother. On a warm spring morning, the bikers gathered for the annual Veterans Memorial Charity Ride. This time, there were 30 bikes. Word had spread, the story had traveled, and men from chapters across the state had come to ride in honor of what had started on a quiet California street a year ago. Mr. Bobry stood at the front, helmet in hand, looking at the faces around him. "We ride for those who can't," he said. "We ride for those who served, and we ride to remind the world that respect isn't dead, it just needs men willing to carry it." The crowd erupted in cheers. As the engines roared to life, Gadzi pulled up on his Sportster. Big Ken raised an eyebrow. "Look at you. Thought you didn't know how to ride." Gadzi grinned. "I didn't. You taught me." Williams clapped him on the back. "You earned this, kid." Bop handed him something wrapped in leather. Gadzi unfolded it. It was a vest, plain black, no patches yet, but on the back, stitched in silver thread, "Respect rides forever." Gadzi's throat tightened. "I don't know what to say." Mr. Bobry stepped forward. "You don't have to say anything. Just wear it with honor." Gadzi nodded, pulling the vest on. It fit perfectly. The ride began. 30 bikes rolled through Riverside Heights, engines growling in unison, a sound that made windows rattle and hearts swell. They passed Maria's house. She stood on the porch, waving. They passed the Haven shelter, where veterans stood outside, saluting. They passed the spot where everything had started, the mansion, now sold to a family who actually lived there, who actually used it as a home. And as they rode into the hills, the sun breaking over the horizon, Gadzi felt something he'd never felt before: belonging. Not because he was famous, not because he was rich, but because he'd earned his place among men who valued the one thing money couldn't buy: respect. At the memorial site, the bikers parked and gathered in a circle. A chaplain said a prayer. A bugler played taps. And one by one, each man placed a flower at the base of a stone monument engraved with the names of fallen soldiers. Mr. Bobri stood beside Gadzi. "You know why we do this every year?" he asked. "To remember," Gadzi said. "To remind," Bobri corrected. "We remind ourselves and anyone watching that honor still exists, that brotherhood still matters, that the fight doesn't end when the war does." Gadzi looked at the names on the stone. "I want to be part of that fight." Bobri smiled. "You already are." That evening, the bikers gathered at a roadside diner, the same one they'd been meeting at for 20 years. Families joined, wives, kids, friends. Big Ken's daughter, now a year older, a year bolder, stood on a chair and made an announcement. "My daddy says that when a biker becomes your friend, they're your friend forever." The room erupted in laughter and applause. Maria, sitting beside Miguel, wiped her eyes. Gadzi, sitting across from Mr. Bobri, raised his glass. "To the brotherhood." Bobri raised his. "To the ride that never ends." The glasses clinked, the laughter continued, and somewhere, out on the open road, the sound of engines echoed into the night. The story ends where it began, with a simple truth. Justice doesn't always wear a badge. Sometimes it wears leather. Sometimes it rides on 2 wheels. And sometimes it shows up when you need it most. Final frame. A lone bike sits on a desert highway at sunset. The rider removes his helmet, looks out at the horizon, and says, "This isn't a story about bikers, it's a story about brotherhood." The engine starts. The rider disappears into the distance. And on the back of his vest, one phrase remains: "Respect rides forever." If you believe respect still matters in this world, if you believe working people deserve dignity, that bikers are guardians, not outlaws, that one act of kindness can change everything, ride with us. Hit that subscribe button and join the brotherhood.